Hello, this is Steve McQueen, and this is Freeze Frame with UK Esquire.
Play the drums. And feel it through your whole body. Make a wish. Think.
One wish.
One wish.
What a lovely boy. What a handsome... Dad!
That scene was totally improvised. I told them, Saoirse and Elliott, that I'd written something they'd ever seen, but I hadn't written anything. And I had been sweating about it for weeks before because I knew this scene was coming up, but I couldn't, I wrote this, wrote that, and it wasn't. I just trusted they would have this thing going on because Saoirse and Elliott had this chemistry. I mean, Saoirse, when I cast her, in fact, it was her agent who got the script somehow. And obviously, she's got an amazing agent because I wasn't really thinking of Saoirse, I wasn't thinking of anyone. But as soon as Saoirse's name came up, I thought, oh, of course, that'd be amazing. So I had this conversation with her when she was in Australia doing a picture. And the conversation was really about her and her mother and her relationship with her mother and how close she was with her mother. It was obviously mother and daughter, but it was also about being like best friends. So as soon as we had this conversation, I was talking about my mother and the else, but I knew that she had this sort of thing, which could be extremely positive for the film. And then I cast her, and then after that, I was searching for, George, who would play George. The net was thrown, large and wide, and this tape came back of this child called Elliott. And I saw this tape, and there was a total stillness in him. There was this he looked a bit pissed off, in fact. And he had these big eyes. And it's like you leaned in because you were so engaged with his face or what was going on or what you were thinking about. You thought you knew what he was thinking about, and then you didn't, and you wanted to find out. So he had me locked in. And it was almost like a silent movie sort of star where, his expressions were so subtle, but you understood him. And it was just incredible. So anyway, he came in, and I got him to work with the acting coach, child acting coach Simon, who's extraordinary. And then Saoirse met Elliott, and somehow they just got on like a house on fire. They just really gravitated to each other. And I think Saoirse almost like put our wing around Elliott to almost like to protect him, because also, let us not forget that Saoirse was 9 years old when she started acting, exactly the same age as when Elliott, the same day he started acting, or when he got the role. He was 9 years old, he was 8 when he auditioned. So there was this real bond, and therefore I relied on that bond. I relied on that sort of mutual respect and affection to come up with something on the day of shooting that scene. And everything on this thing was improvised, and it's obviously one of the most important scenes in the picture, because obviously something emerges from that, which is bases the ending of the picture. If I looked at films of that era, I mean, I wouldn't have seen the real London. And just by doing the research, what was interesting is how much more fascinating it was as a landscape. Again, as I said before, how sort of diverse it was, how, again, large Chinese community, huge, black community of 7,000 with 3 clubs, Asian community. It was really, London is Britain is a colonial power. So, it was very, very diverse that way, but also what was going on with women at that time. Again, they were the backbone of the country, emotionally and physically. So it's in a situation, the research gave me so much to look at and think about, because it was a world which I haven't seen before, but actually it was the world of that time. And then sexuality, people exploring and so forth and whatnot. It was very, very interesting, very, very fascinating. I think we know more about the Tudors than we know about the Blitz era. So Elliott is about to be taken off to the train station to be evacuated. There was 800,000 children that were evacuated to the countryside, other places outside of the cities in London, in UK rather. And was Elliott starting his journey to be evacuated.
Look after yourself, my boy, and don't forget, be brave and stand up to bullies. What do we always say about them?
All mouth and no trousers.
Pardon? I didn't hear what you said. Speak up, please.
All mouth and no trousers.
Correct. Come here. Yeah, this is for emergencies.
Thank you, Grandad.
Well, that was Paul Weller playing Gerald, George's grandfather. And again, when I was thinking of the grandfather, obviously a very pivotal character in the film, I immediately thought of, after I finished writing, of Paul Weller. His face was sort of ideal for that role. And I thought, the depth of who he is as a person, that weight that he would bring could be helpful for the picture, even though he hadn't acted before, because I was relying very much on his songwriting talent, of course, that he could, inhibit a role. Because obviously when you write something, I think sometimes you inhibit a role. At first, Paul was not convinced at all, but I think he trusted me. We got him together with an acting coach, and they worked together on the script. And lo and behold, thank goodness my hunch was right. And I think, Paul has, I think he's got 8 children. 2 of them, 2 of his children are black mixed race children. So I knew when Gerald was hugging George and hugging him and putting that money in his pocket, he knew that when he was going away, Paul would have some kind of understanding through Gerald's mind what would go through his head once that kid was left home, because he knew what the dangers would be ahead for someone who was like George. So again, it was a fundamental of him as a character, but also him as a person. He's extraordinarily charming, extraordinarily lovable, Paul, extraordinarily gentle man. That him hugging George, and that is Paul. There's a real kind of real gentleness and generosity about him, which was hugely helpful for us in that scene. And also in that scene, you see some kind of the sort of the beginnings of some kind of romantic interest as such with Harris Dickinson and Saoirse Ronan. It's a glimpse of something which we'll obviously learn a bit further along in the movie. A sort of beloved, interrupted by war. I've never felt so useful right now as an artist, as a filmmaker, because unfortunately where we're finding ourselves in this time is like, there's wars on Somalia, Ukraine, Libya, Palestine, Israel. I mean, it seems like the whole world's on fire right now. And I think making this picture for me, and it being about seeing war through a child's eyes has never been so important right now for us to refocus our gaze, as adults, refocus our gaze and to look at ourselves. The introduction of the criminal gang through Stephen Graham and Kathy Burke.
Done good, Jess. What's his name?
George.
Come here, boy. Let me take a proper look at you. Where you from?
Albert asked you a question, George.
Stepney, Clifford Lane.
Oh, dull.
Right. Let's get you to work, boy.
Got that off?
This was sort of a very, again, interesting sort of introduction for me, because again, it just shows another part of London, what was going on, through criminality, necessity and poverty, really. I just wanted to explore that. I mean, this is what happened during the Blitz. There were organized gangs and stuff like that who went to places to sort of, obviously steal. There's been some talk about this being like, this sequence being a little bit like Oliver. Well, Oliver is not George Hemingway. And how people see, Oliver is very different to how they see George M. Hemingway. How George Hemingway sees things is very different to Oliver. So it's completely, utterly different. I mean, it's like saying that I'm, Prince Harry. How people perceive me before I even open my mouth, or George opens his mouth, or how he's perceived, how he sees things is very, very different. So it's a kind of we're talking about something completely much more complicated than that, which is race, again. And even in this situation with Stephen Graham, whose father's black, again, race comes into play too. And of course, it's a much more complicated sort of world that we are sort of looking at and thinking about. It's a very dark fairy tale, but not one which is sort of has been ever seen before. The film is about, not just us fighting our enemies, but us fighting ourselves. I think, in fact, what it did in some ways, it sort of brought lots of things to the surface. Because when things are desperate, things become desperate. Things often, unfortunately, come divided. Yes, united as well, but often divided. And I think Blitz sort of brings those things to the surface. Blitz is on cinemas and streaming on Apple TV Plus on November 22nd.